It was only, 24 hours ago that the president said the U.S. is winning big in Iran, and we'll see the fruits of that labor very shortly. It does seem like we are far from this getting tied up anytime soon.
Well, thanks for having me. Certainly, the president continues to profess U.S. victory in this conflict, but at the same time, we are seeing tit-for-tat strikes between the U.S. and Iran, and we're not quite at the point of an escalation to or return to full-scale conflict, but we certainly are seeing more damage and expansion of targets by the U.S., both geographically and in terms of the types of sites that are being hit.
Courtney, what is the threshold for saying we've returned to a full-scale conflict?
Well, I don't know that there's necessarily a quantifiable level, but certainly with the number of targets that the U.S. has been hitting, where CENTCOM is reporting strikes in the dozens. Early in March, in April, at the peak of the fighting, we were seeing hundreds of targets hit per day. Many of those targets are no longer viable because the U.S. has destroyed them. And so I think now that there is a sort of a vanishing number of sites they can hit, you're seeing the U.S. striking further into the country and going after bridges and infrastructure that, according to CENTCOM, is still used to support military operations, Iranian strikes on ships in the Strait, et cetera.
Josh Wingrove, let me get your perspective on how the White House is looking at this conflict now. It does seem like there's still an element here where the White House feels like it can kind of win this war of attrition just by staring Iran down. Do we have any more nuance or detail about the strategic direction of this conflict from the White House?
It's a great question. I think President Trump has pretty clearly been told by his advisors that this blockade puts more pressure on Iran than these activities and the overall situation puts on the American economy and the American armed forces. In other words, he thinks time is on his side. In his public remarks, he seems to have kind of moved on from it, like he doesn't talk about it as much anymore. And so I think right now we're just sort of in the status quo indefinitely. And of course, the question is what that means for him. There were a lot of Republicans who wanted a quicker end to this, or for the president to at least be serious about pursuing any deal that was actually there. The American negotiators would quibble with how serious the Iranians were about making a deal at points in time. And so we seem to just basically be here indefinitely. And what that means for the president is sort of an ongoing focus on whether they can continue to escort ships through the southern part of the Strait. Remember, of course, that was the big pressure point, Trump saying when they announced their previous deal, look, some countries only had 4 weeks left of reserves or that kind of thing. And so if Trump can be confident that oil markets and energy markets more broadly can withstand the status quo, then I think the status quo is going to remain the status quo for some time. And, we'll see where that goes. We have not seen a lot of pushback from Republicans in recent days, or frankly, from within the administration itself and some of the more isolationist voices, including the vice president.
Yeah, Josh, I'm wondering about, I don't know if there is one, but if there's a strategy to the messaging here, because it seemed prior to that NATO meeting in Ankara, the president had kind of washed his hands. He'd even said he was a bit over it. And then there were those threats to his security. He ended up having to take the old Air Force One plane, which caused a bit of a kerfuffle, a lot of pushback from the White House on that report from the New York Times. But if you're inside the White House, we've been talking for months about how exactly what you just said, advisors to the president, Republicans running in the midterms want this off the books, so when they go to run for office in November. If this is going to stretch out and have this indeterminate timeline, is the strategy just don't talk about it and maybe people will forget it's happening in the background? Is that kind of what's happening here?
I suppose you and I can come to that conclusion. I don't think that there necessarily is, a grand multi-week plan. I think they're just sort of rolling with how it goes and trying to create an ecosystem that would be, get Iran back to the table and get to a situation where that makes sense. And so, we'll see. We don't expect to hear from the president today. I should say that I'm sorry. I'm purgatory here. I'm in New Jersey. I'm, not quite with Trump. I'm not quite at the World Cup. I'm not quite with you all. I'm just sitting here waiting in case Trump needs his press corps.
Classic New Jersey story.
Anything.
Yeah.
I know. It's a pleasure to be here. Courtney has the right Bloomberg backdrop. I have a Marriott landscape.
I was going to say, I know what hotel you're in. I've seen that picture in many a hotel room.
Exactly. So anyway, we don't think Trump in his public remarks has not been placing emphasis on this. This is a fact. And so I think from that, historically with him, we can tell that he's sort of moved on in his mind to other things. Remember, there are brewing questions about America's capacity to continue doing this, or at least the effect that it would have on American munitions reserves. Courtney is an expert on this, so let me stop there and defer to her. But there's sort of the ripple effect of doing this indefinitely and carrying out strikes on Iran indefinitely is not nothing. And so we will see how long the president's appetite is for that. But so far, it's full steam ahead.
Yeah, Chief of Naval Operations telling us last week he is concerned about how long those ships have been out, including ships like their big battle cruisers who've been out a record number of days at this point.
So let's move on from Josh Bonvoy Wingrove to Courtney McBride here. And Courtney, let's pick up on what we were just talking about there, the degree to which this war can continue in perpetuity. So Josh rightly referencing the fact that there is such strain here on the military as this lasts longer and longer. How manifest is that concern in the halls of the Pentagon, among the president's national security advisors, that this really, there are limits to how long that this can go on?
Sure. I mean, certainly there's the public messaging that the U.S. has everything it needs to continue this war as long as the president decides to do so. That being said, there is certainly behind the scenes concern about munition stockpiles, particularly for certain high-end weapons. The Pentagon does have a plan to ramp up production, but we're talking years before some of that bears fruit. That being said, I think the strikes that are happening now may be using different types of munitions than those that were relied upon early on, that are multi-million-dollar missiles and are in much shorter supply. So at this level, short of that high-end full-scale operation that we saw in early March, in April, this could continue, at this level for quite some time.
Well, I want to pivot a little bit, quite a bit actually, Josh, and I do want to ask you about this speech the president made on Thursday. There was a lot in there, but among other things, he accused China of interfering with the U.S. elections in 2020, saying the Chinese government stole over more than 200 million voter files. But it was unclear in all those documents that were released what they really did with them or what the argument was, how they used them. Why make this speech now? What are the objectives here, especially ahead of this upcoming Xi visit to the U.S.?
Yeah, let me start by saying that I and other reporters have been going through these documents since they were released. The president has been upset there isn't more coverage of it. What I have seen in there is not a lot of new material. Many of these claims were debunked not only by American intelligence agencies, but under the Trump administration in the first term. A lot of the dates that you see on these documents are 2016, 2020, even earlier than 2016 in some cases. They're heavily redacted. They're sort of cherry-picked. It's not really clear what they're saying. And some of them also reveal Russian attempts to influence the election in the favor of President Trump, whereas the Chinese sort of breadcrumbs here are that they preferred that President Trump did not get reelected. And so I think broadly, there's bipartisan concern about the security of American elections, including foreign interference, not only with China, but with other countries. Specifically, I think the question is whether the president is using this as a narrative or a pretext to push, again, for changes to the voting systems in this year's midterm election. Of course, he's been pressing for passage of the Save America Act, which would make a lot of changes. There's been zero or next to zero appetite in Congress to do that. He's trying to strong arm it through. I think there are a lot of open questions about what steps he might take in the run up to and during the voting period in sort of a lot of crucial districts as he tries to cling to the House. Of course, we all know that they've redrawn the map to try to maximize their chances of bucking the historical trend here where presidents tend to lose the House in their midterm elections. And so I think the question of Chinese influence is not new. The concerns about it remain valid. There was not a lot of new information from the president that I heard personally on Thursday. I think there are concerns broadly about foreign interference, but the question, I think, is the domestic context and how the president is viewing these midterms and what levers he might try to pull in the run-up to them.
As we wrap up here, Courtney, let me turn to you on the issue of Ukraine. President Zelensky in the midst of this 40-day campaign, and we've seen another cabinet reshuffle. There's a new prime minister as well. But I'm struck by the protests that have emerged after he removed the 35-year-old defense minister from his position there. He who was really a pioneer of, an advocate for more drone warfare in this conflict.
Very effective.
Very effective,
ways,
and we see, long-range drones now targeting Russia, as we've talked about on the show, Moscow, St. Petersburg, seeing them train at the Sea of Azov as well. What do you make of this? What should we make of this? What does it say about the broader kind of strategic direction of this conflict, the latest cabinet reshuffle, Courtney?
Well, I mean, this is an approach that President Zelensky has taken before in terms of reshuffling the cabinet. But the decision to oust Defense Minister Fedorov certainly has struck a nerve, and I think has raised some very serious concerns about the battlefield impact. It remains to be seen what is going to happen in terms of permanent leadership. One of Fedorov's allies has declined to take a position at the ministry, and so I think there's a real concern that you could see a backslide in terms of Ukraine's innovative and really effective approach to striking Russia.
Do you know what prompted this decision? Why he did this now?
That is a mystery, I think, for a lot of people. Fedorov had been clashing publicly with some of the sort of military old guard, and I think there's a lot of speculation, but nothing definitive.
Josh, last question to you. I'm not going to make you respond as a Canadian to the president's allegations about these fires, but you did have a scoop this week that's Canada-related, having to do with this bridge that's kind of been surrounded in controversy between the U.S. and Canada. Get us up to speed on what you've learned here through your reporting.
Yeah, very, very quickly. This is, I don't know how quickly to do this. Is like a decades-long saga. This Gordie Howe Bridge is sitting there waiting to open, and Trump, Lutnick specifically, intervened to block it from opening because they wanted a bigger share. Deal was struck in 2012. The Canadians agreed to pay for everything in exchange for getting their money back. And so Prime Minister Carney has been under a lot of pressure domestically because questions are swirling whether Canada will get its money back and about what price he sort of paid to Trump to get this bridge open, for a bridge, again, built with Canadian money in the first place. And so we have viewed the document, the sort of confidential agreement. It is simple. It is one page long. And what Carney has agreed to do is kick the equivalent of net profits after operational costs for 15 years of this bridge. He said that might not be a lot of money. In fact, it might be negative at the start. And so this contradicts some of the Prime Minister's previous remarks on it, and that's why it's sort of become an issue back home. But this bridge, it just continues to be this saga. And so what they've done now is essentially set up an incentive where the more money and more traffic that goes through this toll bridge, the more money will go to this U.S.-controlled regional development fund. The current bridge it's privately owned. It's kind of a wacky story. It's an incredibly busy trade bridge. Trucks, taking every car part you can think of over and over all the way. So they want a second bridge.